you see during the George Floyd riots? This is Minneapolis burning as riots exploded across America, fighting against police brutality and racial injustice following the death of George Floyd.
You want more of your people to die? You coward!
It was justifiable. Definitely a lot of outrage.
With as many as 26 million people who protested across America, with an estimated $1 to $2 billion in property damage, and over 10,000 plus arrests nationwide, the death of George Floyd caused complete chaos across America and the world, as peaceful protests turned to riots and looting. Was the death of George Floyd a racist white cop murdering an innocent black man?
There's a lot of evidence that supports, in fact, that he did not. And I actually challenge people to come forward with evidence that he did.
Free Chauvin. Free Chauvin.
I want to put a knee on your chest for 13 minutes. Tell me what that would do to you.
Or was this the unfortunate death of a career criminal in police custody with a potentially lethal amount of fentanyl in his blood, an underlying heart condition, and the added stress of resisting arrest and being restrained by the police, leading his heart to fatally go into cardiac arrest and dying?
Get out of the car. I didn't know it was I didn't know. I can't choke. I can't breathe. I can't breathe.
Leading to this viral video we all saw, without any of the crucial context leading up to it.
They are alleging that he's got 2 milligrams of fentanyl in his mouth when he was first approached by Officer Lane.
What actually happened on May 5th, 2020, leading to George Floyd's death? Why was the body cam footage showing all of this context withheld from the public for 2 months as the entire country burned in the name of racial injustice and police brutality?
It started with the tragic and senseless murder of George Floyd, and it extended through the week of righteous anger being expressed by community leaders and all people of conscience.
If you're feeling that sadness and that anger, it's not only understandable, it's right.
America is racist. It is not enough to be not racist. You have to be anti-racist.
Yeah. I take responsibility.
I take responsibility. I take responsibility.
And if all the context was available, would America have burned down? Would the public fought to defund and abolish the police? And did these protests lead to meaningful police reform across America? I pulled up to Minneapolis 4 years after George Floyd's death to see what the locals thought. What did you see during the George Floyd riots?
Chaos.
Chaos?
Yeah. All that calls for, even the police, even the people that did that. Like me personally, I wasn't a part of that.
I just seen people destroying everything, just going crazy, stealing things from the store.
Oh, terrible. I moved to Moorhead after that.
Oh, you left after you saw all that?
Yeah.
It was that crazy?
Yes, it was. Seriously.
It was justifiable. Definitely a lot of outrage. People knew what was going on for a long time, but this was the first time it had ever been caught on camera that way.
Stupid.
Yeah.
Uncalled for. Go out there and protest, sure, but destroy the city. And Walsh didn't do a thing about it. Thing called National Guard for a couple of days.
So I didn't see really much, but just like the smoke and the fires and stuff like that in the air.
Not quite. I wasn't there, but I saw it on the news, and it was heartbreaking. I was born and bred here, so it
this
hurt.
is your place.
This is my city, man.
Well, I'm a Metro Transit driver.
All right.
It was a scary time right after the riots. In fact, I was working on a Nicollet garage. They were worried about all the buses blowing up, so they moved all the buses to the airport garage.
Just tearing up our stores. Nobody didn't have nowhere to go. They had to go far out. And then when it got better, they built all everything back, and then everything started to be good.
No, crime got worse. More killing, lots of killing.
Do you think the George Floyd riots led to a positive change here in Minneapolis?
No.
So roughly $500 million in property damage. Do you think that was justified, what happened after his death?
No, I don't think it's justified, but it's understandable.
Understandable.
But the crime rate's worse, much worse.
I think it's gotten worse because there's been shootings, down here, downtown, and it used to be a beautiful city 30 years ago, you know.
Do you think the police feel less emboldened to do their job?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that shit going up. We pushing the murder rate on both of them. That shit going up, not down.
It was sad, like the world was crying, you know what I mean? They wanted justice, you know what I mean? But they should have not teared all our stores up, you know what I mean? That was like messed up. We didn't have nowhere to go, you know? Like,
and apparently 60% of those property owners were uninsured. They lost it all.
Yeah, they did lost it all.
$500 million in damage.
That's crazy.
Since then, I think it's gotten a little better. I hope it has.
Last 4 years?
And stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like it's been worse, yeah.
I think racism's a key topic right now. That's certainly gotten worse. The separation between everybody.
Like segregation here in Minneapolis?
Yeah, self-segregation. Yeah. I don't know about Minneapolis, but in St. Paul, nightlife just never returned. There's still places boarded up.
When I was working with the police, I definitely saw more movement towards a better response, more accountability. We're making steps in the correct direction. You know, it shouldn't have ever happened like that, but now that it did, you know, at the very least, like many tragedies, let's have good come from it.
Sure. What are your thoughts on George Floyd?
Can I tell you something though, man?
Yeah.
What people did to goddamn George Floyd was a goddamn shame, man. They didn't have to put the knee on this motherfucker.
I think it's really sad what happened to him.
I believe what happened to him should happen to anybody, and that's all I can pretty much say.
George Floyd, I can't speak on a man I don't know, but it seemed like a big misunderstanding of all that was going on. There's been a lot of killings, cop killings, and there's a lot of times we can do things to get ourselves killed, so I can't speak much on it.
It's all a joke.
It's all a joke?
Yep.
In what sense?
He overdosed.
He overdosed on the fentanyl? Do you think the police was accountable for his death?
No.
No.
They,
so?
Yes and no, because they mistreated him, but in the backseat,
restrained him, but they had to put their feet in there.
In the backseat of their car, they found pills that he ingested. So obviously he overdosed. I read the toxicology report.
He was a kind, gentle man. I mean, he died over something stupid. He died over a counterfeit $20 bill. Putting your knee on his neck for 9 minutes, he just went too far. Chauvin just went too far. So.
Free Chauvin. Free Chauvin.
And why should he be freed in your opinion?
Because he's not guilty. George Floyd overdosed. Chauvin was using the proper techniques as demonstrated in their book. And I also read the coroner's report, which showed no strangulation.
I heard he put a gun to a pregnant woman and robbed her, and I heard he's a drug dealer, and I heard he had fentanyl in the system. Would that change your perception of him at all?
I don't know that guy, so I mean, if he did that, I mean, it is what it is. Yeah. I'm not a BLM guy, like, oh, I supported all this. I think all lives matter. I mean, it's pretty bad that he got killed in the first place, but I mean, it is.
The question is, what are your thoughts on the fact that they made a shrine for him that's an autonomous zone near the Cup Noodles where he died? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's kind of messed up. It's like we're glorifying a criminal guy.
How is it being a cop here in Minneapolis? Is it tough? Is it easy?
Personally, I would say no, because if you're a good human being, you kind of, it's a good thing happens.
Sure.
So.
After hearing if the public thought the destruction of their city was righteous anger, I headed to the holiest site in Minneapolis, George Floyd Square, a 4-square block memorial to George that stands to this day that was once a cop-free autonomous zone completely blocked off to traffic for over a year and fortified with concrete barricades. What did the residents that lived in this holy zone think of their newly christened patron saint, George Floyd? There is George Floyd. Right now we are walking into the occupied, liberated zone right now. A lot of art out here commemorating his death. Right behind me we have the Hand of Solidarity, Fire All Cops. Now we are approaching the mural. But before I enter George Floyd Square, have you ever wondered about your family history, where your ancestors are from, who you even are? Thanks to the sponsor of this video, MyHeritage, you can discover your family history and build out your own family tree. All you really need is the names, date of birth, and location of birth for your parents and your grandparents. Once you put that data in, MyHeritage will start to pull from over 20 billion easily searchable public records and over 90 million active users to start figuring out who you're related to. And MyHeritage's instant discovery tool will match info from your family tree to other user profiles' family trees. So if you don't have enough info to figure out who your great-great-great-grandmother is, maybe another user does, and it can connect the dots. In fact, I took this family tree 13 generations back and found that on my mom's side, I have ancestors that came from Scotland and from England to the original 13 colonies. MyHeritage also did some digging and found that my great-grandfather here fought in the 96th Division in Okinawa after Pearl Harbor was attacked while his pregnant wife was at home, where he received a Bronze Star Purple Heart for his bravery. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code here to sign up for myheritage.com for 14 days free. That is George Floyd. What are your thoughts on the mural? Do you think it's an interesting phenomenon that he's kind of like a patron saint? Like,
he's become that.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Good or bad?
Good. I
Good?
mean, what was good about it is it brings attention to things that have been put under the rug.
He's a legend. That's what I'm gonna say.
In what sense?
He actually, I don't know, but I don't know actually. For real, I'm not gonna lie.
Okay. I heard he like robbed a pregnant woman and was a drug dealer. Would that impact your perception of him, or he's still chill and a legend?
It's still the same. I would say.
Same?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on this garden?
I think it's good for the, for the neighborhood.
Okay.
I think it makes the transportation a little difficult.
Do you think it's questionable to memorialize like a criminal, a guy who like robbed a pregnant woman and was a drug dealer? Is that a questionable guy to make like the guy? No. Here when things got a little crazy?
Well, when it first started, my birthday was after that. It was kind of scary, but
Were a lot of the businesses out here kind of nuked?
Yeah.
Were they getting looted?
Yeah, everything got looted.
Do you think that's right?
It's messed up.
How's Minneapolis right now?
Quiet, rowdy. Around the first of the month, it gets really bad. During the day, it's okay, but at nights, it's like really bad.
Okay. Just dangerous characters out there, people lurking.
A bunch of homeless people walk around. They sit in this bus stop and do
Right here? They're doing fentanyl in here?
Knew this was something that started a conversation that was much needed.
Sure.
So wanted to come check it out. So pay my respects to Mr. Floyd. It's a tragedy.
Do you think he was a guy that should have been put in this sort of idol position right here?
I don't know that anyone would choose that for themselves. He is a martyr, just kind of powerful right now to be near the spot where he was killed. So just trying to kind of soak it all in.
Yeah.
So.
Do you think there's systemic racism in America?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think if we look at our Constitution, non-whites being half a people, one of the powers, I think, of someone like Martin Luther King Jr., he didn't want to burn the place down, but he wanted to call America to be what it said it was, and that is a place for all people where all people are made equal.
So now open under new management. Let's see what's going on here. Hello. What are your thoughts on the murals and stuff being there? Does it help business? Does it hurt business?
It's okay.
It's okay?
Not so bad, not so bad.
Will the city let you move it?
Not so bad.
Okay. So we have George Floyd right there. Not the most flattering photo, but nonetheless.
My thoughts on George Floyd.
Exactly.
The George Floyd instance was horrible, but like that's been happening for a long time, and it's kind of crazy that it took somebody's cell phone to actually take hold to what actually happened. But George Floyd, that's some of the people that's around the hood in a way though. And I'm not sitting there justifying saying that it's okay, but it's not okay. I really do hope that we move forward. All the murals and stuff like that is a little bit much.
He's almost like Jesus, is what I've noticed.
Yeah, but it's
we
just
that, like almost like similar to the cross, right? Like that mural over there, he looks like Malcolm X or Martin Luther King.
Like, honestly, though, like that's what's crazy about it, though, because that dude wasn't like that in a way. I'm thinking people are sitting there trying to take it and run with it because they're sitting there feeling like about time somebody said something.
Do you have any thoughts on what went down?
I was working on a route real close by.
Okay.
Coworkers were sending me pictures of white people with Uzis.
Oh.
And I knew those weren't Black Lives Matter people because...
Talking Antifa?
No. We're talking about people who wanted a race riot. They saw an opportunity, kind of just like the...
Are you saying white people came to like fight black people?
Were ready to do that.
I see.
Just like, I don't know if anybody knows, but during the insurrection on January 6th, there was supposed to be a Black Lives Matter protest there.
Okay.
They got word of the insurrectionists coming in, and they stood down because they didn't want that to be about that. Same thing here.
I see. So the Proud Boys came to confront the...
Because we were inundated with cars and trucks with no license plates.
Interesting.
So a lot of it was... other people instigating things and really exploiting the racial tension.
$500 million in property damage in Minneapolis.
Yes.
What are your thoughts on those riots?
I think it was purely stupid. Why would we ruin our own neighborhood if there's injustice in our neighborhood? There's better ways to actually take a different path. And then what's crazy, after we burn everything down, you see a whole bunch of people coming around that normally don't.
People coming here as like white saviors. And,
That's what I'm saying, though.
Sure.
It is just like, yo, where was you at
20 years ago,
before
30 years ago,
George Floyd thing happened? Because guess what? There was plenty of George Floyds that happened in the neighborhood.
I know during the time, LGBTQ plus sort of made it a part of their movement as well. I've noticed that whenever something bad happens to the black community, it seems like other movements hijack it and make it about them.
You know what? I completely agree with that, though, is because everybody is looking for a little bit of hype. Everybody's looking for a little bit media. But it's been around for a while. Now all of a sudden you want to jump in.
Also, I had to deliver a block here, and I hadn't realized, but there was also a lot of indiscriminate tear gas throwing.
Okay, from the police?
From the police, just to liven things up a little bit, and I walked right into a cloud of tear gas.
Sounds terrible.
My tears were shooting,
Oh, man.
shooting straight forward. I had to
Okay.
go back to the station.
What are your thoughts on the murals and the memorials for George Floyd here?
Well, I'm hoping we can get a bona fide museum. This
Okay.
really needs to be commemorated. It needs to be noted what happened, what happens. This narrative is not usually told. In fact, the narrative from George Floyd has so blurred and so gotten confiscated by another agenda.
What is that?
It feeds right into racism and all the things, we don't want black people voting, do we? If you want to say black and you're Republican, you just say Chicago.
Is that real?
Yeah. You want to say gay, you say San Francisco. You want to say
Okay,
Jewish,
all right.
you say New York.
I was going to ask, do you think some of these people that are abolish the police, defund the police, was that a positive change they were pushing towards?
When you're in trouble, who do you call?
911.
911, and who's coming? The police.
911, hopefully, yeah.
So you need the police. There's certain police officers that is bad, and there's some police officers that's good. But like at the end of the day, you have to think about it. It's a job, and they have to get home too. They have a family. Because if I go out to my job and I know somebody that's trying to shoot me, I'm going to react in a little bit more hostile, because if you're mentally thinking that you could shoot, let's just say, a family member, a friend, somebody who bumps you wrong, and they already know that when you pull it up, they don't even like you, how would you take that?
Let's say I'm black, I get pulled over on a traffic stop. I don't know what goes through that person's head versus mine. You think there's a big difference culturally in the way police just kind of work?
To be quite honest, if I get pulled over, I do get a little bit nervous in a way. When they ask for certain things, and the way they ask is a little bit more hostile than others. When you come up to the car, hey, let me see your ID, and do extra stuff like, yo, let me see your hands, make sure your hands. But then let's be quite honest, because I was in a car where there was a couple of white people, and then when the cop came up, was like, hey, excuse me, are you okay? What's going on?
Oh, shit, okay.
When you really, really think about it, though, you got to think about the neighborhood that you're in a way, though. They're doing their job. It's a job. When you pull up to certain people, you got to be a little bit more cautious. I get it, because at the end of the day, they want to go home.
We lost journalism, as
We're
did the
talking
justice.
the mainstream media or independent journalism, or both.
Pretty much all of it. Oh, everyone was happy with someone not answering anything. The most detailed conversation we got about childcare from Trump was childcare is childcare.
Okay.
That's it.
Well, let me ask you a question then. You said we're talking about this race stuff, but that race stuff led to $500 million in property damage. Cities across America were burning. Who instigated that?
Why is your first reaction as a police officer is to gun down children? Trayvon Martin, was he 8, 10? Breonna Taylor, Missouri. She was asleep. Gun down.
Sure.
And the best they did in that trial was property damage. The police committed property damage. Not even her life was worth it. Don't get me started on property damage.
I'm saying the whole city was burned down. Like 6 people died in the protests. A lot of people went down. Yeah.
I really don't know what the tally was, who went down, but I can tell you the initial intent was peaceful. Like I said at the very beginning, you had people instigated.
Sure.
White people with Uzis are not Minneapolis liberals, okay? They're from somewhere else.
Sure. Bust
Driving cars and trucks without license plates. Well,
as it relates to George Floyd, though, you mentioned asking the hard questions. So there was meth and fentanyl in his system. The police officers.
Oh my God, I don't want to hear about that.
Why not? You don't think that'd be a contributing cause to his death?
So a cop is a jury, a judge, executioner.
No, I don't think that's the point. I think the point is, were there any other factors that led to his death? Heart disease, and then the question is, if
standing on your neck for 9 or 13 minutes, would I ask you, what had you had for lunch?
Well, that's not my
Would
point.
it matter? He was not a Girl Scout. I am so sorry. He wasn't the perfect martyr.
Yeah.
Okay?
But my whole point is, if the media, if you're saying this is a class war, and then in this very example, you witness the media create a race war almost overnight, and that racist white cop kills black man. There may have been some added layers of nuance to that, right?
Yeah, there were.
Including, some drugs in the system, some underlying heart conditions.
So I want to know the perfect victim on both white and black sides, where the person slaughtered was an angel from God. Show me that.
No, I agree with you to some extent. I think
I'm sick of hearing what George Floyd had in his system.
But
Does
that contributes to the conversation of
be executed?
That's not my
So
point.
Tell me, if you had a joint, should you be executed?
Absolutely not. I'm saying if the joint caused me to OD and potentially die, and then we vilify the entire police department across the entire country, and so there's systemic racism.
No, I want to put a knee on your chest for 13 minutes. Tell me what that would do to you without a thing in your system. Tell me. You think you could do 13 minutes without no oxygen?
Well, I mean, he was screaming, "I can't breathe," right?
Yeah, exactly.
Have you ever screamed with no oxygen in your lungs?
No. You've got the narrative just to your
What do you mean? No, but I'm asking the questions. No.
He should have stood up and said, "Hello, police officer, please don't do that to me. I am not able to breathe properly."
Sure.
Would that have satisfied you?
Well, he said he wasn't breathing before he was even
should have
touched,
gotten
right?
up in a suit and tie and said, "Please don't do that to me. I think you're violating my rights."
All I'm saying is, if there's other underlying causes that would have contributed to his death, and we pin it on a broken police system or systemic racism or these fundamentally broken.
Racism doesn't exist, right?
That's not my point.
Well,
of course it does.
Let's look at the victim. Let's blame the victim. Police don't have any control over their guns or their guns. Okay, I gotta go.
No, all right, great conversation. See ya. It was clear people differed in their opinion of what exactly happened to George Floyd even 4 years later. But with the mainstream media seemingly in coordination overnight, labeling George Floyd's death a cold-blooded murder by the evil racist Derek Chauvin, while the other 3 officers were just as guilty for standing by when it happened, were these cops ever afforded a fair trial with due process? Given the public's extreme involvement in the case, and with legitimate widespread concerns of the city being completely burned down if Derek Chauvin was found not guilty, and how important was the media in shaping public sentiment and the actual outcome of the Derek Chauvin murder case?
Despite what this court has ruled, I know we cannot hide our thoughts or intent from God, for we must give an account on the day we appear before God. Therefore, I must obey. To hold on to the truth that I did not commit these crimes. My conscience is clear.
After 3 years of reflection, I was hoping for a little more remorse, regret, acknowledgement of some responsibility.
Why was the body cam footage withheld from the public 2 months after George Floyd's death? And why didn't the media reassess the context leading up to Floyd's arrest, releasing the body cam footage for the public to watch themselves? Given that the only time I'd seen the police body cam footage in full and dissected at length in a documentary titled The Fall of Minneapolis, I met up with the investigative journalist who made it, Liz Collins, and her husband, who was president of the Minneapolis Police Union at the time, Bob Kroll, who in 2020 came to be known by the public as Bob KK Kroll. But real quick,
I'd be like, go on down the road, you fuck.
If you want to support our boots on the ground independent journalism that is not bought and paid for by corporate interests, along with exclusive DLC content that YouTube won't let me upload, and uncensored early access to all my videos before they go up on YouTube, go subscribe at patreon.com/Tyler Oliveira for less than $5 a month. Bob, what was your role here in the Minneapolis Police Department 4 years ago?
4 years ago, I was the president of the union, the Police Officers Federation of Minneapolis president.
Take me back to May 25th, 2020.
That was Memorial Day. We just returned home from a long weekend away, and I got a call from Thomas Lane that said he was involved in a critical incident, and everything for me and everyone else changed around here.
Liz, What was your job here in Minneapolis?
So I was a longtime anchor and reporter for the CBS station in Minneapolis, WCCO Television. I'm from Minnesota, worked at that station for almost 15 years.
What were you doing on May 25th, the day George Floyd died?
We had just been coming back from a trip out of town and was at home when Bob got the call that there was this in-custody death involving Minneapolis police. The video surfaced on Facebook several hours later. Anybody who looks at the video thinks this is awful, this is horrible to watch, but in Bob's role, and I've been a reporter, for 20 years, I always know that there's a lot more to the story.
The first phone call I got, I thought maybe it was an excited delirium case and someone had died in police custody, or respond to it as I did at all critical incidents. I go, just let me know if he survives or not, because these things, unfortunately are not that uncommon when they're dealing with people that are hopped up on narcotics. It could be an OD, it could be an excited delirium, it could have been any number of things at this point. I briefly asked if there was any force used on him, and there was minimal, just restraining, no strikes, anything like that. And about 20 minutes later, Tom called me back and told me that the subject had been deceased.
And that was George Floyd?
Yes. I went to the courthouse. They were clearing the scene and going down to our headquarters, downtown Minneapolis. Basically, our role there is, one, calm the officer, tell him what's going to occur, what takes place. And generally, our priorities are get the officer photographed in his uniform as he was in the incident, surrender the firearm to the crime lab. If they want to see a police chaplain or anything like that, sometimes they're available. We would review all the body camera footage. Sometimes it's that night, oftentimes it's the next day, or maybe a day at the max, 2 later. It's always been made available within a couple of days.
And how long did it actually end up taking?
Well, in this case, we never got it.
But this is the very first time that in a critical incident that the press was not allowed to see that. Why taxpayers pay for body camera footage, right, or body cameras for all their officers. So I still don't have a very good answer to this day as to why they kept that body camera footage from the public for so long, because we know that there was so much more to this incident. Right away that they seemed to want to keep this hidden for some reason. So then as a reporter, that almost raises more alarm that why are they manipulating this? Not only that, but it's very early, within the first couple of days, that I noticed that there are 2 pages that are mysteriously missing from the police training manual. This is after the police chief and the mayor start saying, whatever you see on camera there, that is not something that these officers are trained to do. That's not a recognized technique. And I just, as a reporter, go online, like I've done many times before, to check this out. And still to this day, I haven't got a good answer as to why those 2 pages were wiped.
And what did you notice was missing from the police training manual?
So the policy in particular that was gone was the maximal restraint technique, the MRT.
Can you explain what that is?
So it's a policy. Basically, you hear Thomas Lane say it in the body camera footage. Which
says MRE, right?
Yes, and then in the interview with the FBI, he says, I may have said it wrong, but it'd be MRT.
Let's take him out and just...
What?
MRE.
I can't breathe. Here, come on out. Look at you, thank you. On the ground.
I appreciate that, I do.
You got your restraint. Hobble. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Jesus Christ. I can't breathe.
Thank you.
I can't breathe. Stop moving. Mama. Mama.
Yeah,
Mama.
he's awesome.
Mama.
One of the front pouches.
Mama.
On my right side bag.
Mama. Mama.
Get EMS go too.
You're the best guy. All right.
In subsequent interviews with Derek Chauvin, which I've done while he's in prison, he talks about that's exactly what they were doing, MRT. All of the officers have said that's exactly what they were doing that day. If you look at the side by side of what was in the manual and what took place on 38th in Chicago, it's exactly what these officers were doing.
And I had just left, and the public information officer called me back up. He said, can you come to the chief's office? And I returned. You should know, we had a very good working relationship, he and I. He says, you got to see this. And he showed me the footage taken from the girl's cell phone at the scene. And he says, I'm going to call in the FBI. And I said, Chief, don't you think you're jumping the gun here? Let's put the brakes on. I go, we don't know if this thing has been doctored. We don't know if it's authentic. Why don't we wait until we see all the other footage, all the officers' body camera footage, footage leading up to this, any other type of footage off of any other systems available before we call in the FBI. And he said, no, but it's a decision that I make, and it was 3 a.m. So that's what changed the game.
3 a.m. The chief of the police says we're going to turn this into the FBI. Does that seem abnormal to you, in your opinion?
Much. They've never came in before, ever. Okay. So at that point, everything changed in that all the video evidence for us to see was locked down. We never had a chance to view it, and truly the first time I saw any of it was on television during the officer's criminal trial.
Former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin's murder trial began on Monday. Chauvin is charged in connection to the death of George Floyd. Floyd died last May after Chauvin allegedly kneeled on his neck and head for nearly 9 minutes.
Chauvin is in the courtroom, but America's on trial. America's on trial to see if we have gotten to the place where we can hold police accountable if they break the law.
Of course, the prosecutors are going to come out with using the video. Now, the defense, of course, is pretty sure that they're going to try to poke a hole in that and say, no, George Floyd had drugs in his system, he had other medical conditions, which are more likely to be the cause of his death than Derek Chauvin.
So, Liz, how does the media handle this video at the time as you're sitting back and watching it all unfold?
Yeah, so this was very different, really from the beginning. Normally, we get more context from our, so-called leaders. Instead, you could tell there was this, fanning of the flames that happened right from the get-go, talking about how this wasn't a part of police training. You have the mayor apologizing to Black America, when in fact there are 4 police officers on scene of mixed race. A Black police officer arrests George Floyd. Just all these things that were not matching up with what I knew enough about the case, but more than anything, how much was hidden. Kept documenting all of these things that I just knew something was not right, but I was also bringing it to the attention of reporters who were covering the story, because I was not, and it seemed they were not interested. Instead of actually focusing on the facts of this case, they went ahead and just wanted to dive into this very divisive and dangerous narrative.
They terminated them all within 24 hours. By Derek Chauvin's request, we never grieved his termination. He said, I'm not worried about the job. I want to keep my livelihood and be cleared of any wrongdoing, but I'm not interested in coming back as a Minneapolis cop despite the outcome. So we never filed a grievance in Chauvin's case. We did file a grievance for the other 3 officers because, again, if you're going to, the internal discipline is completely separate from any type of investigation over the death. If they would have been ultimately cleared in these trials, it comes back to only the evidence they knew at that time, and there was 0 for an investigation. So we did.
In their eyes, it was the video?
Yes, that video off the phone. That would.
So in your opinion at that time, do you think something's amiss? Is this unusual? Are you like, what the hell's going on?
Yeah. Again, I handled a number of these over a number of years. Yeah. This was an anomaly. Nothing like this had ever happened before.
I can't breathe. He quickly rises to sort of this martyr role, which is interesting because there's a lot of information out there about him. And this is not to say that this isn't a tragic situation that happened. He didn't deserve to die. Nobody's here to say that, but there's just a lot to be said about what was kept from the public. He was in and out of prison most of his adult life. He was a felon, and in fact, the suspect in a couple of sexual assaults that took place that still to this day no one has reported on. And also this arrest in 2019, which is so similar. He can't breathe. He's not complying with the police. He's has to be taken to a hospital because he nearly overdoses in that situation.
Open your mouth. Spit out what you got. Spit out what you got.
Yeah, he was the subject of an undercover drug investigation. And instead, you have the chief talking very shortly after this incident. He says, we don't know George Floyd. We've never had any interactions with him. That was just another lie. Thomas Lane, that approaches the vehicle, but a clerk at Cup Foods that calls because George Floyd had allegedly passed a counterfeit $20 bill.
Okay, so at what point does George Floyd say, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe?
It happens within minutes of Thomas Lane and Alex King getting on scene.
God, I'm claustrophobic, man.
You ain't breathing or whatever you
in the car. Get me in the front. Please.
No, you're not getting in the front.
I'm claustrophobic.
Get in the car.
Okay, man, okay. I'm not a bad guy, man.
Get in the car.
I'm not a bad guy. Oh, man. Open my nose. Please, officer. Please.
Sit.
Please.
Take a seat.
Please, man. Please. No.
Take a seat.
I can't choke. I can't breathe, officer.
Clearly does not want to be arrested. And he has kind of a very similar script almost as to what transpired in 2019. That's why we put the body camera footage in the fall of Minneapolis, because nobody ever got to see any of that. So that's why the first 20 minutes of our documentary is in fact, here's what actually really took place that day.
And in that documentary, you guys zoom in on him swallowing something. What is that perceivably?
More than likely, was drugs. But they were trying to pass it off basically as that it was gum in George Floyd's mouth.
Interesting.
And there were drugs found in his car, on him. The autopsy is something that also could have been released. Within 12 hours, the autopsy is complete on George Floyd. Still to this day, the only official autopsy by Dr. Andrew Baker of the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office. And that autopsy shows there's no strangulation marks on George Floyd, no asphyxia. So many things that would also have countered that video pretty quickly. They have to wait for a little while with the toxicology results, which show 3 times the lethal limit of fentanyl in his system, methamphetamine. He has very large organs, blockage in his heart. He has a paraganglioma, which is a tumor in his hip. He's been described to me as, sadly, kind of a ticking time bomb. Instead of getting that medical evidence out there, it's withheld and released on the same day that George Floyd's family releases their own, they call it an autopsy, but it's really anything but. It's 2 medical examiners hired by George Floyd's family, and they basically say, George Floyd was a healthy young man, and he died from what you see in the video. Why wasn't the public told that Thomas Lane called for an ambulance 36 seconds after George Floyd himself asks to be laid on the ground?
I'm gonna lay on the ground. I'm gonna lay on the ground. I'm gonna lay on the ground. Get in the squad. I'm gonna lay on the ground.
EMS go too.
I just released a written statement, and that was within a day or two after, very brief, that, the officers are cooperating in the process, and let's be calm and not jump to judgment. And I was apparently villainized for that.
Why was that controversial?
I still to this day don't know that answer to that. If you read the statement, there's nothing controversial about it.
So after releasing that statement, do you then become KK Kroll in the public's perspective?
Well, you got to understand, in years past, I had spoken out for officers, under investigation in critical incidents where all the facts were known to me because I had talked with the attorneys, I had viewed the video evidence, and I, in some cases, saw where the suspect had shot at the officers. So I came out and held press conferences and made a much stronger statement, which in hindsight would be better, and most agencies throughout the country have actually the chief of police do that.
The news station you worked with and for, they knew your relationship with Bob early on. Tell me about that as a foundation.
Yeah, so we'd been married for several years by the time this even happened. I didn't report on Minneapolis police incidents involving the police union, beyond car accidents or there were crimes and whatnot, but Bob obviously had nothing to do with. Actually, we never really had any issues. It was fine, but it just all blew up, that we had some sort of conspiracy, wedding, and I was hiding it from the public as if I was supposed to talk about what my husband did for a living every night while anchoring the news.
Bob's getting crucified publicly.
I'm getting crucified publicly also.
At what point do you get brought into the public spotlight and you become Ava Braun, as you say?
Within days also. Bob had a familiar face as far as pushing back, and it really bothered them that he brought up George Floyd's criminal history, including an arrest that took place that was almost a carbon copy that took place back in 2019 of what happened in 2020. So that was obviously the wrong thing the media and the public thought for him to do, and I got swept up into all of that as well.
And at what point do these Antifa far-left activists sort of come to your own home and start harassing you and things become a little more serious and potentially dangerous?
Well, I was notified from, the Washington County Sheriff's Office that there had been social media attempts to find out where we lived, and all of a sudden when they got it, it just blew up. My phone had been, received well over 100 voice messages and many death threats.
Besides the 4 officers involved directly in the incident, are you the public-facing fall man? Is Redondo scapegoating you publicly? And at what point were you forced to resign? Or
I was not forced. I retired the regular way. You have to be 55 years old with X amount of years, and I had more than enough years service. So I retired about 6 months after I was eligible for retirement. One of the other things that they targeted me for was I had been on stage with with Donald Trump at a rally in 2019. I assumed everything that the media said about him was put on to me in the same manner, which helped villainize me with everyone on the left.
Social media takes the story and runs with it for what it is. The body cam footage is yet to have been released. The public's outraged. When does the city burn?
The city starts burning within 2 days. Nothing that night. The next night you see the crowds start to gather. We were in communication with people that work at the airport. They talk about airplanes full of people coming in. Bricks were set on intersections basically to be thrown. I mean, you see sort of this, something is going on.
Sure.
And rather than our political officials coming out calling for calm, they instead, again, make this all about race. And, they're talking about how this is justified behavior. Words mattered so much in that moment, and they certainly didn't use the right ones.
And what I noticed from the media at the time is we're seeing a mostly peaceful protest. Is that what you saw?
Where I was working, we were not even allowed to use the term riots at all. You could call them protests or peaceful protests. I saw that very early, how they were manipulating the language. Happens within just a couple of days, the real rioting starts. At first, it's just big crowds of people coming into the city, actual airlines flying in with people that were protesters, professional protesters coming in.
You look at the place now, it's decimated. I don't ever see it recovering. The area we just walked through was the most vibrant intersection, Lake and Hennepin, for years and years and years, and now it's a ghost town.
And do you think the death of George Floyd ultimately furthered relationships between the police and the public, or did it negatively affect it?
I think it's impacted the communities that they were out to help, if you will, in a negative way. I think if you'd interview your average black citizen in the city, they would tell you they wish they had more police. They never had bad relations with police, and they actually wish the white liberals from the suburbs would stay out of their business.
And how did the rest of the cops feel at this time?
They feel defeated. They're scrutinized over everything they do. There's no proactive police work going on because they don't want to end up going to prison or being fired. It's completely changed the dynamic of policing in not just Minneapolis, but beyond.
How much damage was done to the city following George Floyd's death?
About 1,500 businesses have been destroyed and over $500 million in damage. And many of these businesses did not come back. And if they did, their customers didn't come back.
The majority of them were minority-owned businesses along Lake Street. I think it's a total of 17 people that were charged federally in the wake of the riots in Minneapolis, and the longest prison sentence was about 4 years, and that was for arson at the 3rd Precinct. But if you look at the video yourself, you can certainly see a lot more people responsible than 17.
When you eventually see the rest of the police officers in trial and the results of that trial, did you end up thinking this was a miscarriage of justice in any ways?
Oh,
did they even have a chance?
There was no chance. It needed to be a change of venue. The jurors, they were compromised and intimidated. People knew who they were. They're walking in every day to a place that's built like a fortress with fences around it and National Guard out and things like that. There was zero expectations in my mind of a fair trial for any of the officers involved without a change of venue. And the judge took a cowardly way out.
I think that he himself really felt that what they did so much in those very early days, they were kind of writing the script themselves. So he didn't think that he stood a chance at a fair trial either. Their trials were separate, but Derek Chauvin, obviously he was found guilty. But also in his case, not so much what the jury was shown and told, but more about what they were not. Again, MRT was not even allowed to be in the trial of Derek Chauvin.
The body cam footage, was that admitted?
It was admitted, but I think you could watch the trial and you can see almost how it's manipulated. There's a reason you were only able to see that one exhibit with what looks to be Chauvin's knee on the neck. Freeze frame, I think it's about 17 different times that it's shown, rather than the actual body camera footage where there's more to it. And the other officers, they've told me in interviews that after they saw what happened in Derek Chauvin's trial, they went ahead to just decided to plead guilty because they would have faced even longer prison time after seeing what Hennepin County jury would return. Tu Tao had a couple years added to his sentence after he told the judge, I didn't do this, I'm not going to apologize. And then he started quoting Bible verses. The judge didn't like that and gave him an extra couple years. I think that they were looking for a case like this all across the country. This was a presidential election year, but we really had the perfect people in the perfect positions in our politicians for this to be allowed here. Actually, in a way, I feel bad for George Floyd. I think he was really used.
A burden that is now your purpose to change the world for the better. In the name of George Floyd.
He was used for this movement. His family never even went back to collect his personal belongings. You know, his relationship with his family was not a good one. He wasn't a great person, but I don't know how we've become so twisted as a society that we would look at basically a lifelong felon as a hero.
What role do you think the media had in Chauvin's conviction and the way the public perceived this entire series of unfortunate events?
You know, this is partly why I left, so-called corporate media, because they cared more about pushing this propaganda than facts. And I've always been one to care about, there's another side or bring this person forward. That did not happen with this story. And I think fear permeated the day. Clearly, it sent a message when you watch hundreds of businesses burn to the ground each and every night over and over again. So are you going to be the one that's going to step up and say, hey, there's this, or how about this? Fear is pretty powerful. The thing that would have changed this right away is if they just told the truth about all of it. You have a man who committed a felony. He's resisting arrest over and over again. Again, you have Chauvin, who wasn't even supposed to be working that day, who just arrives on scene. George Floyd at this time had been talking about how he can't breathe before Derek Chauvin even arrives there. Just imagine if they would have released this video, let's say the next day, which they had it, and they went frame by frame with the public. Just keep calm, cool heads. Maybe this looks like one thing, but here's what all happened. Instead of taking pages of the manual offline, instead of hiding the body camera footage from the public, you're firing the officers the very next day.
Rather than fuel the flames, try and tamp them down. That's the role of leadership at that point, and we had the exact opposite in both Minneapolis and the state of Minnesota.
Ask yourself, why was this withheld? Are you okay with your justice system looking like this? Are you okay with your government acting like this? Are you okay being lied to? I think these are questions we need to ask ourselves. It's really a sad state of affairs for someone like me who really believes in journalism when you actually have to leave your career in order to tell the truth.
How important was the role of the mayor at this time and the Governor Walz?
Again, it's a time that called for leadership, and we saw the exact opposite. Using the words murder within days, making this all about race, apologizing to Black America. Black lives, sadly, have never mattered less in Minneapolis. The homicide rates are up 30% over where they were at this time last year.
Do you think the Black Lives Matter movement and the death of George Floyd positively impacted race relations in the United States?
Well, I think a lot of people have turned on Black Lives Matter, realizing that it is in fact just a Marxist political organization. That's what it always has been. It sounds good, right? But I do think people are waking up. You don't see their footprint here quite as much as you once did.
Do you think Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd?
So I would say there's a lot of evidence that supports, in fact, that he did not. And I actually challenge people to come forward with evidence that he did.
While considering that the original medical examiner of Hennepin County to have examined Floyd's body before Floyd's family hired 2 other pathologists to do so, he believed that,
in my opinion, the physiology of what was going on with Mr. Floyd on the evening of May 25th is, he had very severe underlying heart disease. I don't know that we specifically got to it, Counselor, but Mr. Floyd also had what we call hypertensive heart disease, meaning his heart weighed more than it should. So he has a heart that already needs more oxygen than a normal heart by virtue of its size, and it's limited in its ability to step up to provide more oxygen when there's demand because of the narrowing of his coronary arteries. Now, in the context of an altercation with other people that involves things like physical restraint, that involves things like being held to the ground, that involves things like the pain that you would incur from having your cheek up against the asphalt, an abrasion on your shoulder, those events are going to cause stress hormones to pour out into your body, specifically things like adrenaline. And what that adrenaline is going to do is it's going to ask your heart to beat faster. It's going to ask your body for more oxygen so that you can get through that altercation. And in my opinion, the law enforcement subdual restraint and the neck compression was just more than Mr. Floyd could take by virtue of those heart conditions.
In contrast, Martin J. Tobin, a world-renowned pulmonologist, testified that Floyd died from a low level of oxygen, citing how Chauvin's knee and Floyd's position on the concrete obstructed Floyd's airways.
That Officer Chauvin's knee is coming in, and that's compressing in against his side as well. So the ability to expand his left side here is enormously impaired. And of course, the key factor you must keep that isn't kind of in a sense seen here in one sense is the street. The street is what is having a huge effect because he's jammed down against the street. And so the street is playing a major role in preventing him from expanding his chest.
Ultimately, the jury sided with Tobin's theory and ruled Chauvin's knee and in turn Chauvin to be the cause of death.
We just felt like the evidence was overwhelming for our verdict. It had nothing to do with pressure from anywhere.
Mitchell says for him, the most compelling witness on the stand was this man, Dr. Martin Tobin, one of the nation's leading lung experts.
So let's say, just as the jury found, Chauvin's knee did in fact kill Floyd. Let's say Chauvin's knee on his body was a complete and improper use of the maximal restraint technique. Let's say it was not even the maximal restraint technique given that the hobble was never used. What if this was the result of police training by the MPD that led Chauvin to act accordingly within the context of this arrest? First, let's start with the testimony by Lieutenant Johnny Merciel establishing that MPD cops were trained to assume if someone can talk, then they can breathe.
Have you ever been trained or trained others to say that if a person can talk, they can breathe?
It's been said, yes.
Furthermore, it's of this lieutenant's opinion that it would have been more difficult to render medical aid if the individual is fully hobbled.
Is it more or less difficult to render medical aid if someone is in the maximal restraint technique?
I would say it was probably a little bit more difficult to maneuver around that.
You would not be able to put them on their back, for example.
It would be difficult, sir, yes.
His testimony also establishes that people often lie to avoid arrest, and police are aware of this.
When you've arrested people, have you had people plead with you not to arrest them?
Yes, sir.
Have you had people say they were having a medical emergency?
Yes, sir.
Have you had people say, I can't breathe?
Yes, sir.
Were there circumstances during the course of your career as a patrol officer where you didn't believe that that person was having a medical emergency?
Yes, sir.
And that's all part of the analysis in terms of the use of force, right?
It plays a part, yes, sir.
There was also evidence to suggest that a cop can hold someone in a prone position, not turning them into the side recovery until the scene is code 4, meaning the scene is safe.
You also train officers to be very much aware of their surroundings at all times, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you were asked a series of questions about continuing to hold someone in a prone position, and you used the term, you could hold them there until the scene is code 4. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
And so it's fair to say that the Minneapolis Police Department would train officers under certain circumstances to hold a person in a prone position until the scene is safe, correct?
There are circumstances where that is appropriate, yes.
And some of those circumstances could be the reaction of bystanders, correct?
That may be a factor, yes.
Which officers are trained to assess the totality of the scene, to which one could argue the nearby crowd was hostile. If these are the parameters Chauvin was trained under, and if Chauvin's knee really was the cause of death, then who is really to blame here? The police department itself, or the officer trained under the police department? And was this entire scenario the result of bad or vague training principles, in combination with a series of unfortunate external factors? Did Chauvin really showcase evidence consistent with that of a depraved mind, or was he holding a combative person resisting arrest and potentially posing a danger to himself with an angry crowd nearby yelling at them until the EMT arrived, to which in any other circumstance they would have arrived when Floyd was still breathing, given he was still talking for 5 minutes straight while on the ground.
Please, relax. I can't breathe.
You're doing fine. You're talking fine.
Deep breath. I can't breathe.
What time did you say I arrived?
8:26:29.
And the medics arrived at what time?
The medics were called at 8:21.
I don't believe that.
Thomas Lane himself, the officer who mentions placing Floyd on his side, only claimed to know about that side recovery position not from his training at the MPD, but because of his training at a juvenile correctional facility. So were all these cops even taught about the recovery position? And was every police officer, including Chauvin, taught that the hobble was always required to implement the MRT? And would it have been logical to assume the EMT would arrive faster than putting the hobble on Floyd, therefore decreasing the amount of time required for Floyd to receive the medical attention he may have needed? This EMT testifies that under normal circumstances, emergency services should have been able to respond within 3 minutes. But in Floyd's case, it took this long. Did the crowd yelling at the cops present inherently unsafe conditions for them to administer medical attention? Was Chauvin's intent to kill, intent to cause serious harm, or extreme recklessness proven beyond a reasonable doubt? Furthermore, why weren't the jurors in Chauvin's media-frenzied trial sequestered? Was the jury biased in either their selection, or either implicitly out of their fear of the city being burned down if Chauvin was not found guilty? Was Derek Chauvin's and the rest of the cops' actual training in the use of the maximal restraint technique consistent with what was found in their respective manuals? Would Floyd be alive today if he didn't have a potentially lethal amount of drugs in his system? And would this situation have played out the exact same if George Floyd was white? And as I stand in front of this $6 million mansion purchased by the founder of BLM using donations, we should ask ourselves who stood to gain from pouring gasoline on the flames of this metaphorical fire that was Minneapolis, rather than trying to put the flames out.
If I don't believe anything you're saying, where can I find the book and the documentary?
You can take my word for it, but they're lying. The media, the left, and the death of George Floyd is easy to find on Amazon. The Fall of Minneapolis, it's thefallofminneapolis.com. You can go there to the documentary and watch it for free. And if you also click on the news section, we keep track of everything kind of related to all these cases, and we continuously update what's going on.
Thanks again, MyHeritage, for making this video possible. Scan the QR code right here and join MyHeritage for 14 days free.